The waiter set the leather folder down in front of me like it was nothing. "Here you go, miss. Full total for the engagement party." I flipped it open. $2,417.86. $2,400 for a night I'd been told I wasn't welcome at. Behind the glass wall of the rooftop restaurant, my sister Kelsey clinked her spoon against a champagne flute. "Okay, everyone, family only at this table," she sang, pitching her voice just loud enough for me to hear. Real family. Not adopted add-ons. The people around her laughed. Not awkward little chuckles. Real, comfortable laughter. My mother Christina covered her mouth like she was embarrassed, but she still smiled. My father David shook his head as if Kelsey were just being Kelsey. Kelsey looked straight at me, made a little shooing motion with her fingers, and mouthed, "Go. You're ruining my vibe." I was standing just outside the glass, in the windy section of the rooftop, with the bill in my hand and my card already sitting in the black folder. They thought I'd do what I always did, pay vanish. Let them celebrate. I smiled at the waiter, handed him my card, and said, "Put it all on this." He left. I stayed. From where I stood, I could see every detail. The white flowers. The custom neon sign with Kelsey and Thomas, glowing in cursive. The ice bucket packed with premium champagne. My father's tailored suit. My parents' friends, beaming, basking in reflected wealth. My wealth. The payment notification buzzed on my phone. Transaction approved. I slipped the receipt out. The paper was warm against my fingers. That warmth snapped something into place inside me. They hadn't just stuck me with a bill. This was the last invoice I was ever going to pay for people who treated me like a walking credit limit. I folded the slip, tucked it into my coat pocket, and turned toward the elevator. Behind me, through the glass, Kelsey threw her head back laughing. She didn't even glance my way to confirm I was gone. Of course she didn't. In their minds, I always left when told. As the elevator doors began to close, I heard her voice cut through the music. "Wait, just a second." It wasn't aimed at me. It was for the waiter, who was apparently bringing out another round of drinks. She had no idea that sentence, "just a second," was going to echo through a courtroom later. Before I tell you how we got from that dinner check to federal charges, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I want to know who's sitting at this table with me, even if my family never did. The elevator doors slid shut. Silence. For the first time in years, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a door locking on the past. I pulled out my phone. A text was already lighting up the screen. You walked out? In front of everyone? You embarrassed us. Where are you?" I stared at her name. "How many times have you embarrassed yourself on my dime?" I thought. I didn't answer. Instead, I tapped the little I next to her contact. Block. Then my father. Block. Then Kelsey. By the time I reached the lobby, the stream of constant demands and guilt trips that had been my background noise for years just stopped. No dings. No buzzing. No incoming crises. I stepped out into the cool night air, hailed a cab, and gave the driver my address. As the city slid past in streaks of light, I finally let myself rewind the tape of the last 5 years. People always wonder why someone stays in a financially abusive situation. They think, if it were me, I'd just stop paying. I'd walk away. They don't understand the trap. I'm not stupid. I'm not weak. I'm not gullible. I'm an architect. I make my living understanding structure, what holds, what collapses, what has to be reinforced before everything comes down. I can tell you the exact load a beam will carry before it cracks. But somehow, I missed the moment my family placed me under theirs and decided I would hold up their entire world. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. It started with "we're a little short this month, can you help?" and "you make such good money, honey, you don't even have kids yet." My brain fell into the oldest psychological hole there is, the mindset that says, "You've already given so much, you can't quit now, or all those sacrifices will have been for nothing." Every time I helped, I told myself I was almost at the point where it would all pay off. That if I just kept being generous, just kept proving how loyal and useful I was, eventually they'd see me as a real daughter, a real sister, not the adopted girl they'd pulled out of a tragedy. I thought love was something you could buy in installments. If I poured enough water into the cracked cup, surely some of it would stay. Sitting in the back of that taxi, receipt in my pocket, I finally let myself admit something very simple and very ugly. The cup was never cracked. It was bottomless. Designed that way. The problem wasn't that my investment hadn't paid off yet. The problem was, there was never going to be a return. Ugh. My apartment was quiet when I walked in. Not the heavy, eerie quiet of my parents' house when everyone was pretending nothing was wrong. A clean quiet. Minimal furniture. No clutter. Everything in its place. People called my space cold, the same way they called me cold. They didn't understand that order was the only thing that ever made me feel safe. I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to the small desk by the window, flipped open my laptop, and clicked on the file I'd been avoiding for months. Ledger.xlsx. It wasn't something I'd started out of spite. Back then, it had just been survival. I needed to know where my salary was going, because it definitely wasn't staying in my bank account. The spreadsheet opened to the top. Row 1. Brandon, transmission replacement, $1,245. My younger brother's car. He'd run it into a guardrail while drunk. My parents had called me panicked. We're strapped right now. You know how things are. Can you help your brother? He needs his car for work. He didn't keep the job. I kept the debt. A few lines down. Kelsey tuition shortfall, $4,000. They had miscalculated what her scholarship covered. Apparently, the only possible solution was me. David R.S. payment, $8,500. My father had forgotten to file some things. He called me crying that they might take the house. Christina wellness retreat deposit, $3,200. Labeled as medical. It was a week at a mountain spa with champagne brunches. Row after row, year after year. Utilities until we get back on our feet. Plane tickets so the whole family can be together. I didn't get invited. Credit cards, just this once. At the bottom corner of the sheet, the total glared at me. A six-figure number. I had been living in a studio, buying generic groceries, skipping vacations. They had upgraded phones, designer handbags, a house that looked great in photos. You're so independent, they would tell people almost proudly. Then in a lower voice, unlike the rest of us. She's distant. They made it sound like choosing not to drown in their chaos was a character defect. I stared at the blinking cursor. This document was no longer a budgeting tool. It was an itemized list of every time I'd been told family helps family, while I picked up the pieces of debts I hadn't created. I clicked print. The printer in the corner of my living room sputtered to life. Page after page slid out, the stack rising slowly. 12 pages. I gathered the warm sheets into a neat pile. They were heavier than I expected. All those years, my sacrifice had been invisible, money transferring out of my account in silent digital movements. Now it had weight. Thickness. Proof. I set the stack next to the crumpled restaurant receipt. Audit complete. Next step, collection. My phone buzzed most of the night on my nightstand. I ignored it. In the morning, sunlight pushed through the blinds. The phone was still shivering every few minutes like it was having a nervous breakdown. Caller IDs I'd blocked. Unknown numbers. Notifications from social media. I finally picked it up. One text preview from a neighbor's number stood out. Sydney, this is your mother. You are being selfish and dramatic. Your father is sick over this. We need that card today for the venue deposit. Fix this or don't bother coming for Christmas. You are destroying this family. There it was. Selfish. Dramatic. Destroying. It read like a script they'd been refining for years. They weren't panicking because I'd left crying from their party. They were panicking because I'd walked out with my wallet. The family I was apparently wrecking wasn't a group of people held together by love. It was a system held together by my credit limit. I set the phone down without responding. No twisting in my stomach. No urge to apologize. No frantic mental gymnastics. Just a calm. Not the numb, resigned calm that comes when you've given up on things changing. A strategic calm. I opened Instagram. Kelsey had already posted. It was a heavily filtered shot from the night before. My parents, Kelsey, her fiancé, and Brandon, all in a tight group, holding flutes of champagne, laughing like a stock photo of happiness. The caption: "So thankful for my real family who shows up and supports me unconditionally. Some people choose jealousy and bitterness over love, and that's sad. But we're too blessed to be stressed. Family first. Ring sparkles." The comments were a familiar chorus. "You deserve it all, babe. Ignore the negativity. Focus on your joy. Real queens don't let haters dim their shine." I wasn't tagged. I never was. They were very good at writing a story where I was the difficult one. The cold one. The bitter one. Sydney the workaholic. Sydney who prefers her own company. Sydney who doesn't really do family. Never mind that I had been the one quietly wiring money at 2 a.m., choosing bills over sleep, taking extra shifts to cover their emergencies. I took a sip of coffee and scrolled to the printed ledger. It looked even more brutal in daylight. My phone buzzed again. "Brandon, unknown Appio. Dad is losing it. Just send the card so he can pay the vendor and stop being crazy. You're doing the most." I remembered the time he'd snapped "stop being crazy" when I told him I couldn't afford to clear his parking tickets. 2 hours later, I paid them anyway. Not this time. I slid the ledger into a slim black portfolio, tucked it under my arm, and walked to my closet. Charcoal suit. Crisp white shirt. Low heels. I wasn't dressing for brunch. I was dressing like someone finally willing to step out of the role of grateful orphan and into the role of plaintiff. When I left my apartment, my phone buzzed again. I didn't look at it. They could scream into the void. I had actual work to do. My firm's building rose like a blade of glass and steel in the middle of downtown. Inside was a world I understood. Angles, loads, deadlines. Objective rules. If a design was flawed, it fell. If it held, it passed. Walking through those revolving doors usually felt like stepping into sanctuary. That morning, it felt charged. Sitting in one of the leather chairs in the lobby was a woman I recognized from childhood stories, even though I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 decades. Great Aunt Catherine. In my parents' version of events, she was the villain. The witch. The ice queen. The rich relative who'd abandoned the family. The one who never helped when we were struggling. The reason we had no support. I had been 10 the last time I saw her, at some stiff holiday dinner where adults whispered and watched her like she was a bomb that might go off. She stood as soon as our eyes met, picking up a heavy leather-bound folder from the seat beside her. She looked exactly how my parents had described her and not at all the way they meant it. Impeccably put together. Pale suit tailored exactly to her frame. Silver hair pinned back with surgical precision. Posture like a steel rod. "Sydney," she said. Her voice was cool but not unkind. Controlled. "Let's find a room where no one can overhear us." I didn't ask how she knew where I worked. I didn't ask why she suddenly cared. I just swiped my badge and led her past reception into one of the smaller glass conference rooms overlooking the river. I shut the door. The world outside became a muted blur. "Good morning, Aunt Catherine," I started. "We can skip the niceties," she said, setting the folder on the table between us. "I know what happened last night. I watched you pay for a party you were thrown out of. I watched you leave. And I've been waiting exactly 11 months for you to do that." My spine went rigid. "You what?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I've had someone tracking your parents' financial dealings for over a year," she said. "I know about the constant emergencies, the withdrawals, the manipulation, the public humiliation. I know what they've been doing to you." I gripped the back of a chair. "And you just watched?" Anger flared. "Why didn't you step in? Why didn't you stop them?" She opened the folder, fanned out a few documents like a dealer laying down cards. "Because if I had appeared with lawyers and paperwork before you were ready, you would have handed everything right back to them," she said plainly. "You would have told me they were doing their best. That they were just bad with money. You would have begged me not to destroy the family. And then you would have used any help I gave you to bail them out again." The words were a direct hit because they were true. "You cannot rescue a person who is still determined to drown with the people pulling them under," she added quietly. "You had to be the one to climb out of the river first." She tapped the folder. "Last night you finally did. You walked away from the table, from the bill, from their control. That means you are finally ready to see this. What is it? I asked, throat tight. Her eyes softened. Just a fraction. Evidence, she said, of what was really left to you. And what, exactly, they did with it. I sat down. My fingers shook as I opened the folder. The first page wasn't a balance sheet. It was a letter. Cream paper, the ink slightly faded. Dated 25 years ago, 2 weeks before the car crash that killed my biological parents and sent me into the Bennett's home. To our daughter Sydney. I had to close my eyes for a second. I had never seen their handwriting before. I forced myself to keep reading. We can't know what your life will look like or who will be caring for you when you read this, it said. But we want to make sure you have a foundation. Not just memories. Something solid to stand on. This trust is for you. For your education. Your home. Your future. Use it to build the life you deserve. Below, the letter was a bank statement from the year I turned 18. The name on the account matched mine. The balance in the top right corner did not match the story Christina had told me my entire life. $1,402,389.17. At 18. My chest tightened. My adoptive mother had always told the same story on repeat. Your birth parents meant well, but they were dreamers, she'd say in that martyr voice. They died with nothing. No savings. No plan. We stepped in when no one else would. We gave you everything we had. We went without so you could have a home. It was the guilt that lived under everything. The reason I felt like every dollar I made was a debt I owed them. They said there was no money, I whispered. They lied, Catherine answered, the words sharp as glass. She turned to the next page, a legal document naming trustees. Your mother was appointed trustee after your parents' death, she said, tapping Christina's name. I was the original executor. Your father came to me when you were about 7, crying. He said some investments had gone bad. That the markets crashed. That your trust had been completely wiped out. She flipped further in the file. At the time, the paperwork he showed me looked legitimate. I believed him. I believed they were raising you with nothing. Her jaw clenched. I walked away, thinking I was leaving you with selfless people who had sacrificed everything. I had no idea I was leaving a fox in charge of a henhouse. I turned page after page. Withdrawal slips. Transfer confirmations. Highlights and notes in Catherine's precise hand. Very few of them had my name anywhere near them. $12,000, Kelsey's private academy tuition. $55,000, initial capital for David's consulting firm. $8,000, family trip to Orlando, accommodations and park passes. My stomach lurched. That trip. I was 12, and they'd told me money was tight. They'd said they could only afford to take the kids who still believed in magic. They'd dropped me at the elderly neighbor's house with a stack of microwave dinners and a pat on the head. You understand, my mother had said. This is the kind of thing you can't appreciate anyway. You're too serious. I'd sat on that sofa and watched ads for theme parks until I felt like I was going to be sick. It had been my money they were spending. They'd left me out of my own childhood on my own dime. I flipped to the final pages with shaking hands. The most recent transaction was dated 3 days ago. $25,000, venue deposit, VRR rooftop events. The exact number I'd seen on documents when Kelsey had bragged about her engagement party package. I hadn't just covered the tip and cocktails. They'd drained my inheritance to fund her big night. They stole $1 million from a girl whose parents had just died, I said. It came out flat. Not a question. With compound growth, Catherine said quietly, they've skimmed and squandered close to $3 million over 25 years. $3 million. My vision went white around the edges. They assume it will never run out, she added. They believe they're entitled to it. And they don't expect you to ever challenge it. She pulled 2 heavy envelopes from the folder. Cream paper. Wax seals stamped with a logo I recognized from high-profile legal cases on the news. This one, she said, tapping the first, is a notice freezing their assets. Every account we've been able to trace, every property in their name, every line of credit backed by the trust. She touched the second. And this is a draft of a criminal complaint for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary responsibility. I swallowed. They're at brunch right now, she added. Private country club. Celebrating the engagement. For a moment, all I could see was last night, Kelsey's dismissive wave, my mother's turn back, my father's laughter I'd paid for. Then something very calm settled over me. I closed the folder. Let's go, I said. I think it's time they see the bill. The country club dining room looked like it had been designed by someone trying to make a wedding Pinterest board come to life. Pastel linens. Towering centerpieces. Soft jazz floating in the background. At the center table sat my family. My father, standing, mimosa raised, in the middle of a speech. Family is about showing up for each other, he was saying. Being there when it really counts. The cluster of relatives and future in-laws around him nodded as if he'd just said something wise. Kelsey glowed in white, laughing. Christina looked like the cat who'd gotten cream and then stored it in a trust account. Beside me, Aunt Catherine adjusted her silk scarf, eyes scanning the room with surgical detachment. Ready? She asked. More than I've ever been, I replied. We stepped through the doorway. The noise softened in a wave as heads turned, whispers starting. My mother saw us first. Her smile died mid-sentence. She stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. Sydney, she hissed, rushing toward us. What are you doing here? I told you not to show up. This is not the time. She glanced nervously at Catherine, her gaze flicking to the thick envelope in my aunt's hand. And you, she snapped. You're not welcome here. This is a private family event. This isn't private, Christina, Catherine said, her voice carrying effortlessly without needing to be loud. This is very public. And more importantly, it's the scene of a multi-decade crime. The room fell completely silent. You could have heard a fork drop. My father froze at the head of the table, glass hovering midair. Kelsey looked up from her plate, confusion knitting her brow. Don't do this, my mother whispered, grabbing my arm. Her fingers dug into my skin, her smile plastered back on for the room's benefit. We can talk later. Don't create drama. No, I said quietly. I pulled my arm back. For once, we're going to talk now. And we're going to do it where everyone can hear. Catherine walked straight to the main table and laid the first envelope down next to the centerpiece and the engraved place cards. David. Christina, she said. As of 9 o'clock this morning, you have been served with notice of a civil suit for embezzlement, fraud, and gross misuse of a minor's trust. All accounts associated with that trust, and with you personally, have been frozen pending investigation. My father blinked, color draining from his face. You can't. You don't have the right, he stammered. That money we raised her. We sacrificed. It was reimbursement. Fair is fair. You didn't rescue me, I said, stepping beside Catherine. My voice was steady. You rescued my bank account. I was just the packaging. Murmurs rippled around the table. At the far end, Kelsey's fiancé quietly removed his hand from hers. What about the wedding? Kelsey's voice cracked up a register. The vendors get paid this week. You said the trust would cover everything. You said there was more than enough. There isn't, I said. I met her eyes. The well you've been sipping from wasn't yours. It was mine. And it just got capped. Kelsey swung toward our mother, panicked. You told me it was basically my inheritance, she cried. You said Sydney didn't even want it. You said her parents left it because they owed you. You said. She stopped too late. The words were already hanging in the room, thick and impossible to take back. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A videographer, standing a few feet away, camera up, red recording light blinking steadily. He'd probably been hired to capture candid engagement moments. Instead, he'd just gotten a confession on film. Christina grabbed at Kelsey's wrist, hissing, "Stop talking." Her face had gone a strange, blotchy shade. Everyone calmed down. My father blurted, sweat beading at his temple. We can explain. This is a misunderstanding. It's all in how you look at it. You can explain it to the authorities, Catherine interrupted crisply. She placed the second envelope beside the first. That is notice that a criminal complaint has been filed. Banking records, trust documents, and transaction histories are already in the hands of the district attorney's office. Across the table, Kelsey's future mother-in-law slowly set down her fork. Her expression said everything her politeness wouldn't. I took one last look at the three people who had built their entire identity on the story that they had saved me. My father shaking. My mother, trembling in a designer dress purchased with my dead parents' money. My sister, not crying because of the theft, but because the lifestyle she believed was her birthright had just evaporated. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in their presence. I felt like someone had finally cut the ropes that had been tied around my ankle since childhood. "Come on, Aunt Catherine," I said. "I have actual foundations to build." We walked out as the room exploded behind us. Shouting, frantic phone calls, chairs scraping. I didn't look back. The fallout was faster than anyone expected. Not because I pushed it, because that video of Kelsey's meltdown had legs of its own. Someone at the brunch had forwarded the clip to a friend who worked in media. By Monday, it had been shared thousands of times. It didn't play like a bride under stress. It played like a spoiled accomplice, shrieking because the stolen credit card had finally been declined. Comments were brutal. So her sister's parents died, left her money, and these people spent it on vacations and private school for the real kids? Imagine stealing from an orphan and still thinking you're the victim. Lock them up. 2 weeks later, federal charges dropped. Wire fraud, embezzlement, fiduciary misconduct. Turns out, when you move large sums of money across state lines and between institutions under false pretenses, people care. A lot. My parents were arrested. I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't watch the hearings. I didn't need to see my father in a suit that someone else paid for, standing in front of a judge, trying to spin yet another story. I watched that show for years. Kelsey's fiancé issued a carefully worded statement about misalignment of core values and quietly called off the wedding. Vendors started posting about non-refundable deposits. The country club membership lapsed when the autopay failed. Eventually, the house went on the market, not as a luxury listing, but as an asset in liquidation. Without my trust fund propping them up, the beautiful life they'd curated for Instagram crumbled almost instantly. Meanwhile, my phone stayed mercifully quiet. From county lockup, they were allowed exactly one phone call a week. They spent it on lawyers. Not on me. That was their final, unintentional gift. 3 months later, I sat in an office that looked nothing like my parents' kitchen table where they'd open my pay stubs like they belonged to them. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Clean lines. Big drafting table in the corner. Framed blueprints on the wall. Mine. On my desk was a set of plans for a building that made my chest ache in a completely different way. A community space for teens in foster care and kids aging out of the system. Classrooms. Therapy offices. A small apartment wing for emergency housing, funded entirely by the Recovered Trust. By my parents' last act of love. I ran my fingers over the printed plans, following the lines of load-bearing walls, core supports, foundations. Real foundations. Not the paper-thin ones my adoptive family had built their mansion on. For 20-plus years, they'd constructed this elaborate, impressive life. From the outside, it looked solid. Vacations, parties, private schools, perfect holiday cards. But it had all been balanced on a lie. On money that was never theirs. The moment I stepped out from under it and made them stand on their own, the whole structure caved in. Because it had never been structurally sound. They'd painted cardboard to look like stone and called it stability. Great Aunt Catherine stepped into my office, breaking my reverie. She held out a coffee. "Site visit at 10, she said. "Our general contractor is already there, and I intend to terrify him into staying exactly on schedule." I laughed. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She nodded toward my phone on the corner of the desk. "Any news?" she asked. I picked it up. No missed calls from numbers I recognized. No voicemails from tearful parents or demanding siblings. My notifications were from clients, friends, volunteers for the foundation. People who saw me as a person, not an open tab. "No," I said. "Nothing from them." "Good," she replied. She watched me for a moment. "How does it feel?" I thought about it. It didn't feel like revenge, exactly, even though a lot of people online had labeled it that way. It felt like equilibrium. Like the universe had finally stopped tilting under my feet. "Balanced," I said. She smiled. Really smiled this time. We headed for the door. On my way out, I paused, reached back, and slid my phone into the drawer of my desk. The part of me that had once flinched at every buzz expecting another emergency was gone. The transaction between me and the people who'd raised me, the one where I paid in cash and they paid me back in crumbs of affection, was finally irrevocably closed. If you've ever sat at a table with people who only call you family when the check arrives, share the story. Someone out there needs a reminder. You are not your relative's rescue fund. You are not a walking credit card. You are the asset. You are the legacy. And you are allowed, more than allowed, to walk away the second you realize you've been paying for a seat at a table that was never set for you.